Hey, welcome back to Get Down to Business, the show all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time. I'm thrilled to be joined by Barry Minkow. Quite a story, and I don't want to sort of spoil anything of it. But I have to say that Barry Minkow is started his first business, I believe, in his parents' garage at the age of 16. Became a darling of Wall Street. But fast forward through all that. Spent 15 years in a federal prison. Barry Minkow, thanks so much for joining us and sharing your story with us. Really appreciate it.
Honored to be on the program, Scott. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, such a pleasure. So Barry, let's start with the very beginning. Let's talk about the beginning of your entrepreneurial journey and how that amazing start ended with, not ended because your story is pretty inspiring how it's continued, but in the middle, I should say, ended with some time in federal prison. What happened?
So I think, you bring up a very good point. Starting at age 16 in my parents' garage, no intention of ending up in federal prison. That wasn't in the game plan. And ironically, Scott, when I went to federal prison for all those years, I never met a doctor, lawyer, accountant, professional, entrepreneur whose intent when they went into law and went into debt and passed the bar or medical school and ended up prescribing or overprescribing oxy or whatever it was. The intent was never to end up in federal prison. So what happened? Like them and me in particular, economic pressure happened. Decisions we thought we would never make, we began to practice. I didn't realize that I wanted to do what was right, but I was more than prepared to do what was wrong as long as it kept the plates spinning and the balls in the air.
Absolutely. So initially, I know you were connected with two New York Mafia crime families, released from prison in 95 after serving almost 8 years in federal custody, earned 2 master's degrees, became a pastor and began uncovering fraud. But then after helping the FBI and SEC, I know you pled guilty to insider trading and fraud and ended up back in prison a little bit longer. So I don't want to spend too much time talking about prison because that's not the theme of the program. You are an inspiration, my friend, and you're doing amazing things. But what is the most dangerous thing that happened to you in prison?
I think it was the second time in, and some people are slow learners, but ironically, Scott, I was out for 16 years. So when I reoffended, I was a first-time offender because federal rules of criminal procedure, if you're out 15 years, your slate is wiped clean. But it wasn't. And some of us are slow learners. But the second time I had the boys, I had Lisa, much more difficult. And an article came out in Fortune magazine. You can actually Google it. It was December 2011, 12 pages. And I'm in the security prison with controlled movement. And it mentioned my work uncovering fraud for the FBI. Now, in prison, you're, a snitch. Not that I'm on prison time or any, it never was, but if you testify against somebody in your case and to benefit yourself. But I had no co-defendants. In Z-Best, I went to trial 25 years. In this case, I was the only defendant, so I didn't tell on anyone. But because my profession in the past had involved uncovering fraud, so I had a guy who, Isaac Napper, Golden Glove champion, was at Lexington when that article came out, and he was just lethal, but a great guy. And he did 20 years in Angola State Penitentiary for murder he didn't commit, was released. And then, years later did a kind of a drug thing. I met him there and he took me from unit to unit and said, listen, he's no snitch. That was his profession. He was a licensed PI. He worked on Wall Street and he probably saved your grandma from getting ripped off. So if you have anything to say to him, you could say it to me. And that pretty much ended it. That and the church brothers there stood by me. But it was a very difficult time when you had 2,100 people in Lexington for a prison that in 2011, 2012 that could handle like 1,300. So we were overcrowded and you didn't want to be a guy who the rumor was, worked with the feds, even though it wasn't to benefit your case. But it was a scary time, but God had his hand on me. I was grateful. And I remember Isaac Napper. In fact, he just wrote me this morning. So it's years later. So that was the scariest time.
Absolutely. That's an incredible journey. Again, I'm chatting with Barry Minkow, who is quite literally the story of from fraudster to whistleblower. And Barry, there's probably not a single day that goes by, certainly in my email inbox, but that of our listeners and fellow entrepreneurs, that we don't get an email with just an incredible investment opportunity. You have over 20 financial fraud cases that you have proactively uncovered. What advice would you share for our listeners and for our fellow guests to look for in investment opportunities that people can use in order to, frankly, not get ripped off?
Scott, the only complaint I have is that we're not together longer, because I wish that question was asked more often. Right now, because of social media and the no perception of detection and no perception of prosecution from promoters and perpetrators, I have never seen more financial crimes in progress that are in your face and almost daring law enforcement to do anything. Investigative reporting is dead. Remember, Scott, it was a brilliant investigative reporter, Daniel Axt at the LA Times, who uncovered a past credit card fraud that led to the Z-Best undoing. In the Elizabeth Holmes case, it was the Wall Street Journal, 2015, brilliant investigative reporter. Investigative reporting is dead. Why do I say that? Because that is the unknown variable for fraud perpetrators. So, for example, Reg D real estate multifamily investment opportunities, you cannot look at your feed in an hour without getting a new one. Thousands exist. They have no regulation because they're for accredited investors only. No independent proof of profitability. It's a license to steal. If I was a crook today, it's exactly where I'd go. You wouldn't get caught. It's horrific. And I know we're going out of the spot, so we can come back and really unpack that. But social media imputes credibility to unsophisticated people, and they invest with their heart, not their head, and they get hammered. And that's what I would say.
Absolutely. We're chatting with Barry Minkow, and we're going to continue our conversation and learn all about his advice in just a moment. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. Hey, we're back on Get Down to Business, the show all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship. We are chatting all about from fraudster to whistleblower. I'm chatting with Barry Minkow, who has been featured as the king of the con on the Discovery Channel. His story from fraudster to whistleblower is one of redemption and resilience, a true comeback tale that inspires and educates. I mean, I love this piece of your story, Barry, that at the mere age of 16 years old, you started a carpet cleaning company in your parents' garage, which set you up to be one of the youngest self-made entrepreneurs in the nation. But boy, oh boy, the story has just continued from there. We were talking just before the break about some of the lessons for fellow entrepreneurs to avoid being scammed. You have been, I'll just call it what it is, you have been one of those folks that have been frauding folks. And obviously you have done a complete turnaround. And now we are giving the advice to anybody who's willing to listen to avoid that. And I mean, Barry, we're having this conversation mid-2024. Just seems like it's information overload, isn't it?
Yeah, and let me just correct that one thing, Scott. I don't give advice. I infiltrate the crime undercover for whoever the client, primarily the government or whoever, and yes, in whistleblowing cases, but unless you bring primary source documents from the promoter, you got nothing. So evidence that is usable is all they'll accept. And if you want to stop these crimes proactively, you're going to get threatened. You're not going to make money. Don't believe the whistleblower nonsense. I mean, I've been 5 years at this. We've uncovered well over $1 billion, and there's no check in the mail. I mean, there's always longer and whatever. You don't do it for the money. The point is that I remember my judge in federal court, Miami, said, you clearly have a gift for uncovering fraud proactively. When you get out, you need to do it. Just stay away from those public companies where you can have access to insider trading. But I think the point is today, the whole new landscape, ever since the Jobs Act allowed more freedom to solicit funds from investors online, you have social media, which imputes credibility to whatever the entity. It could be a company you formed overnight, but it looks like you've been in business 20 years. They put any claim up there, 20 years experience in multifamily Reg D real estate. And when I say Reg D, accredited investors only can, and to qualify as an accredited investor, it's much easier now. So you have these multiple companies advertising on social media promising. Now watch this. Here's simple. If 2020 interest rates were zero and they were offering, 22% IRRs annually, and 2024 interest rates and inflation are through the roof and they're offering the same returns, it's pretty untenable. So we always say the 3 Ps: promoter, profit, produce. Promoter, who is he? Do a background check. If he can offer you those returns, why does he need to raise money in the first place? It'd be better not to have the schlep and the headache. So does he have experience? Broker dealer? Background check, or is he a former perpetrator, which in many cases $20 would save you $2 million in many cases. The profits, untenable. Normally and regularly, people in the Reg D real estate market in this environment are losing at the very apartment cash flow. They're not profitable. So all the more if you're offering higher returns. So you compare the industry standard with what the promoter's offering, and there's going to be a drop off. And by the way, there's no independent proof of profitability, audited financials. You never get that, and you're not allowed to ask for it if it's a Reg D deal. And then finally, produce. I've noticed, Scott, that people do more due diligence in the produce section of their supermarket, differentiating between a ripe banana and a non-ripe banana, than when they invest their entire life savings in some social media Instagram ad that promises them world and can't deliver. So the 3 Ps will be proactive tools. Do not invest. Easy to give your money, impossible to get it back.
Barry, I want to make sure our listeners can learn more about your story and get in touch with you. You're an inspiration. I look forward to having you back on. How can we get in touch?
So you can just do our at Minkow_Barry on Instagram, or 1 minute on fraud on TikTok. 1 minute on fraud, all one word. We do 1 minute a day. We don't sell anything. And it's just a minute on fraud for proactive tools so you don't get defrauded.
Absolutely. We'll link in our show notes as well. That's a wrap for us this week on Get Down to Business to Success. We'll see you next week right here on AM 560 The Answer.